Ah, winter in England. It can be thoroughly wet and miserable here with typically one dry day a week. So it's hardly surprising really that so many people plan a getaway to somewhere brighter and warmer at this dark time of year. I've never really been one for beach holidays, but the chance to travel somewhere for the first time in many years with my family, and for that place to offer both a bit of the seaside and cloud-capped 6,000 foot high volcanic mountains was a dream come true. So this was my first ever visit to the island of Madeira. It's somewhere I've been wanting to visit for many years. Two of my greatest passions, both of which very happily combine with photography, are hill walking and also gardening with exotic plants. So to finally be heading to somewhere with volcanic landscapes as dramatic as Iceland, but at a latitude where some of my favourite plants grow like weeds, was a dream come true. So this is day one, and I'm in the back streets of Calheta at the moment, and I'm absolutely loving the fact that there are plantations of bananas literally everywhere. I'm probably about 500 feet up above the seafront here, and I've been down here already. I took a couple of stills. One of them was up this valley here. At the back there's a beautiful church, and then all the kind of cloud and forested hills at the back. And then down here along the coast itself there's a bit of building going on. Well, apologies for the beeping, but basically you've got this couple of old buildings over the back there, and then obviously the coast scenery along. So I've been looking at that with a long lens. I'm going tripodless at the moment. I'm going to pop down later on to shoreline down there where there's been some pretty hefty waves. So I'm going to be down there later on and hopefully catch some late light across those rocks. There's just beyond that actually you can get onto the shoreline itself. So I should be able to get a photograph along the south coast looking east with the sunset perhaps over my shoulder. Yeah, quite amazing, quite a spectacular place, and unbelievably steep roads here. And in the end, that particular evening down on the crab-infested shoreline actually turned out to be pretty successful photographically, although I did get absolutely soaked heading back to my car when that shower finally made it to where I was. I think having had a successful evening's photography down on the shore at Calheta, I was able to give myself permission to relax. And this visit wasn't a photography trip anyway, it was a family holiday. So in advance I'd researched and planned a couple of short trips out to locations close to where we were staying that I could pop to for a sunrise or sunset. I'd also got the bigger plan of us all going to the summit of the Pico Arieiro for sunrise, which I think is probably a to-do thing for most people when they go there, but it's somewhere I've been desperate to visit for ever since I'd really discovered the island.
It's just very European.
Beyond that, really, I was happy to relax, wander and explore the area local to where we were staying. And being a first ever visit, I really wasn't interested in racing around to tick off some of the must-see when you visit Madeira type of places. But later in this video I'll talk a bit more about my unease at that mentality. So this episode's really more of a travel vlog than a landscape photography tutorial type of thing, but I do promise a smattering of decent images throughout as usual, and I've saved my favourites for a slideshow near the very end. And I think even if you're not into exotic plants specifically, it's a garden lover's paradise. And with great views from the terrace of our villa, there were quite a few evenings actually where I was more than happy just to take the odd photograph of sunset from high on the hill looking out across the Atlantic. I think what struck me almost immediately was the staggering amount of incredible engineering that's gone on the island for centuries in the past. The tunnelling to start off with. Tunnels aren't just a recent thing. The older roads, which are hardly used anymore, are also going through loads and loads of tunnels but higher up the hills. The bigger tunnels that we drove through were almost at sea level for most of the time, but yeah, there are tunnels all over the island. And of course, going to the farming side of things, the farms are... People are farming on slopes that are way steeper than 45 degrees. It's insanely steep, and they've just managed to terrace the whole thing and grow sugar cane and bananas and all sorts of things going back for years and years. Quite clear, Madeira has been a very, very important staging post out there in the Atlantic for centuries. Bearing in mind that it's only the same land area as at the Isle of Anglesey off the coast of Wales. It's got a much bigger population than Anglesey, but it's a similar size, although it does rise to a height of 6,100 feet, which is 1,696 feet higher than the highest point in the whole of the UK. So something the size of Anglesey, but something the height of almost an alpine peak, really. And what was a real delight, but probably not a surprise for me, was the sheer number of fantastic rustic buildings in the towns themselves, but also out in the countryside. I'm a real sucker for rusty, crusty, flaky, old windowless buildings, and they were absolutely everywhere. So when I went for my wanders and the rest of the family were enjoying a little bit of quiet time by the pool or down by the shore, I would have a wander up some of those winding roads going up the hillsides and just enjoy making images of doors and windows and an awful lot of black and white cats. So having been home for a couple of months now, I've had more time to think about my unease really at what we photographers often do with our imagery. I think the best example here are my images taken on a family walk from Rabassal along the Levada of the 25 Springs walk. Apologies for saying it in English, but I think I'd have butchered the Portuguese if I'd have tried that. I'd thought a Levada walk would make a great half-day excursion with the chance for a bit of lush woodland waterfall photography. It certainly did that, except that we were with at least 500 other people, and the reality of the place is far from what my photographs portray. Pretty much every one of my shots required that I wait for 4 or 5 minutes for huge groups of people to pass by and get out of sight. So what looks like a quiet, unspoilt place is actually really a queue to get to an overcrowded waterfall at the far end of the walk. I'm not going to go into it in this episode, but do we as photographers have a bit of a responsibility to show the reality these days of mass tourism and its impact on both the environment and the local communities affected? An example being that as we were checking out of our villa, the lady who came to collect the keys said that most locals no longer go walking in the mountains because they're simply too busy and they no longer offer the solitude that they once did. And don't forget that that's now all year round. It's not just a summer season thing. And it's often our imagery that inspires people to visit these places, adding to the pressure. So maybe that's a topic for a future episode. Maybe I'll go to fairy pools on the Isle of Skye. The one thing I was determined to do on our visit to Madeira was to shoot dawn light from the summit of the third highest peak, which is Pico do Arieiro. I'd hoped to do the hike between that and the highest mountain on the island, but that path was actually closed because there'd been a wildfire in 2024 and the path hadn't yet been opened. I think they're doing some repairs to it, so I think it's due to reopen later this year. Now sunrise was at 7:40 in the morning, and true to my normal method, I'd worked out meticulously the time I needed to set out from our accommodation, which is in Calheta. It's almost the opposite side of the island, really. So I wanted to have found some decent foreground material for photographing about 20 minutes before the sun was due to rise. So that was 7:20. I knew that the walk from the lower car park to the top of the hill was probably going to be another 20-25 minutes. So that takes you back to maybe 7 o'clock. And the drive from Calheta, where we were staying, was about an hour and 20 minutes as well. So in the end, we left our accommodation at 5:30, and everything had gone really, really smoothly and according to plan. So we arrived on the top of the mountain pretty much as I'd expected, but we ran into a massive problem at that point because while there'd been no traffic and no sign of any traffic going up all the switchbacks up the mountain in the dark, when we actually arrived there, it turned out that there was a queue into the parking area. The police had barricaded the road off to the higher parking. There's like a big turning circle at the top for coaches and so on. But so everyone who'd arrived in a car was being diverted into the lower car park. And unfortunately, that car park only had one pay and display machine. So there was an enormous queue of people waiting to buy a ticket, to buy a parking ticket to then be able to go up the hill and experience the sunrise, which was a real shame. So in the end, I didn't get to the top of the hill until the sun was just peeking out over the clouds. So I completely abandoned my plans to photograph in that direction. And to be honest with you, the crowds were so dense up there. There were so many people that I couldn't have found an image in that direction without people standing in it anyway. So in the end, I skirted off around the back of a huge outcrop that most of those people were on, and found an area with some great foreground with a view across the Rift Valley, across to Pico Ruivo on the other side of that valley, which was all shrouded in amazing cloud. Basically at that point, the sunlight started to really, really rake in, and it was incredible conditions. It was quite possibly actually some of the most magical conditions I've ever experienced on the hill. You've got ridge lines and pinnacles dipping in and out of the cloud, and you've got the sunlight raking in, lighting the valley below me, sometimes lighting the pinnacles on the ridge lines. Absolutely astonishingly good conditions. And I was there in the end probably for about 2.5 hours, limited only by another mistake I made, which was to buy a ticket for the car with a very limited time on it. I would definitely recommend a couple of tips. One is, if you're ever going to go to Madeira, definitely schedule in a trip to the top of that mountain for a sunrise shoot. It's absolutely incredible. But buy a car parking ticket for the whole day, even if you're only going to be there for 2 or 3 hours. What you don't want is that nagging thought in the back of your head that your parking ticket is going to run out and you've got to leave. So you don't want to have anything that pulls you away from the incredible light, because I could have stayed there all day in the end. And the other tip really, I think, is to give yourself an extra 45 minutes. If you have worked it out as I had, exactly when you needed to be arriving, it's so busy. A lot of these places on the islands are so busy that you really, really do need to give yourself extra time wherever you're going, to be honest. If you're going to go to Fanal Forest, then give yourself an extra half an hour to be able to negotiate really the parking and all the people. This year, I think from my understanding, they are bringing in a whole load of kind of permit systems now for a lot of the locations. So you'll find that if you want to go and do the walk between the two mountains, you'll need to buy in advance a permit to do that. And likewise for some of the real hotspot locations, maybe Rabasal, but certainly Fennell Forest and some of the other major kind of tourist hotspots on the island. And I think that's probably a good thing, really, because if it can help spread the load out across the day rather than people all piling in at a certain time. If you can spread the load out a little bit, that makes a lot of sense. While I did actually take my drone to Madeira, in the end I never used it. I didn't feel comfortable, given how busy a lot of the locations were. I didn't feel that I wanted to kind of launch the drone and fly it out over people's heads and so on. So in the end it stayed in my rucksack. I took it with me wherever I went, but it stayed in my rucksack and never actually got flown at all, which is probably a shame. And maybe next time I go, I'll have a bit more confidence to do that. But I think on this occasion I was happy enough really making the trip a reconnaissance trip and getting the images I got in the end. Well, thanks again for watching. In a second you're going to see what are probably my 14 or 15 favourite images from the week I was away. And if you can, please hit that subscribe button. It really does help to kind of me get a foothold on this new platform. Thank you.